All right, the 8 a.m. update is in from the National Hurricane Center. We want to bring in Fox Weather hurricane specialist Bryan Norcross to hear his take on the update. Bryan, obviously you're king when it comes to these tropical systems. Not a whole lot has changed with the storm, although the pressure went up. So I guess technically that indicates weakening, although maybe this is more of kind of a...
Weather experts emphasize the slow movement of Hurricane Melissa will compound its dangers, exposing Jamaica to hazardous conditions for an unusually prolonged time frame. The National Hurricane Center released its latest advisory showing minimal changes to the tropical system, though barometric readings have risen slightly. This uptick in atmospheric pressure typically signals a reduction in strength. However, forecasters anticipate this represents a temporary stabilization rather than sustained weakening. Predictions indicate the strengthening mechanism will resume, eventually propelling Melissa to reach maximum classification status before turning toward its primary target. The timeline for these developments will unfold gradually when the cyclone begins its approach and weather conditions begin worsening across the affected territory. Hazardous and severe circumstances will persist for a considerable duration. Aircraft reconnaissance missions confirm sustained velocities reaching 140 miles per hour, placing the system firmly within the fourth tier of classification.
Nasty and dangerous for an extended period of time. We'll look at that here in just a moment. All right, so there's the latest from the hurricane hunters out there. 140 mile an hour winds, Category 4, solid Category 4. And when you look at the satellite picture, you can see that this, even though the pressure has gone up a little bit, the actual development of the storm has increased. We'll see that when we look close up here in just a moment. Moving now west at 5. So,
despite the modest rise in central pressure, satellite imagery reveals ongoing structural enhancement within the storm. The system advances westward at a crawl, maintaining speeds near 5 miles per hour. This trajectory follows anticipated patterns, carrying it along a route position beneath the island nation, with the central circulation remaining sufficiently distant from the shoreline. Coastal communities, including the capital region, currently experience relatively calm conditions without significant gusts affecting populated zones. Meteorologists will monitor pressure readings closely, expecting values to decline as the day progresses. Close examination of satellite data reveals notable changes within the central region.
On today. All right, look close up here now and watch the eye. And what you're going to see is it starts out a little cloudy and then it clears up. So there, it's clear. Now let's go back. See it cloudy, 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 and then clearing up. When you see the eye clear up like that, that's a sign that all the mechanics are working in the storm, and it's the air is descending in the eye and pushing the clouds away, and it's just operating kind of all cylinders to be able to do that. And it does that before it ends up getting stronger.
Initially obscured by cloud cover, the core gradually becomes visible as conditions improve. This clearing process signals optimal internal mechanics are functioning properly. Descending air currents within the vortex push cloudiness outward, indicating all components are operating at peak efficiency. These characteristics precede additional strengthening that will elevate the cyclone to its most powerful category. Currently, the strongest circulation remains positioned away from land. Projections suggest the system will track northward before executing a sharp eastward turn toward the southern shoreline,
becoming a Category 5. So, as I said, right now, the core of it down here is offshore, but the idea is this is going to come up and then make kind of a hard right somewhere into the southern coast, and where exactly into the southern coast makes a tremendous difference. So this is the size of the area of strong winds now. Now the yellow means 40 mile an hour plus winds somewhere in this quadrant. So if you divide the storm into quadrants like this, what it's saying is somewhere at that radius.
The precise location where this turn occurs carries enormous implications. The diameter of damaging winds extends outward from the center, with yellow zones indicating areas where velocities may exceed 40 miles per hour within specified quadrants. Dividing the circulation into 4 sections helps identify where these thresholds will be met. Orange regions represent zones where hurricane-level bursts are possible. while the innermost red area marks where continuous hurricane conditions exist. These dangerous winds remain offshore currently, reflecting the relatively compact nature of this developing weather system. Elevated terrain will begin experiencing gusts first, particularly exposed mountainous locations, while valleys and sheltered areas receive some protection.
You can expect winds to be 40 miles per hour or higher in the yellow area. When we get down to these areas, this one is hurricane force gusts, and then this smaller one here is hurricane force winds. So you can see that the hurricane force winds are still way offshore, but this is just a developing storm. It's not a very big hurricane yet. But this tells you that at the higher elevations, the winds are going to start gusting. Not so much down at the surface, not so much hidden in some of those mountains, but at the higher elevations where they're exposed, the winds are going to start gusting in the east.
The eastern districts of the island territory face initial wind impacts. The Hurricane Center's projected pathway shows anticipated positions over the coming period in Eastern Standard Time. By this point, maximum intensity classification is expected, persisting throughout the following daylight period as the system initiates its movement toward the target area. During this interval, intensity may fluctuate due to internal restructuring processes.
Force winds. So you can see that the hurricane force winds are still way offshore, but this is just a developing storm. It's not a very big hurricane yet. But this tells you that at the higher elevations, the winds are going to start gusting. Not so much down at the surface, not so much hidden in some of those mountains, but at the higher elevations where they're exposed, the winds are going to start gusting in the eastern parishes of Jamaica. All right, let's go here and look at the cone from the Hurricane Center and what the expectation is. And there you see it. The idea is that by tomorrow morning, and when it says in the...
These cycles can temporarily reduce strength before subsequent re-intensification, though overall size typically increases during such episodes. This phenomenon could occur multiple times, potentially exposing wider areas to hazardous conditions. The slow forward motion presents particular concerns. Reduced speed means extended exposure to all threat categories. When analyzing potential impacts on the target territory, the sluggish progression suggests conditions will persist far longer than typical events. Even areas not directly struck by the strongest winds face serious threats from other hazards.
At what's called an eye-wall replacement cycle, that may lower the intensity, but that's not really good in some sense because it also expands the storm. And the bigger the storm is, the more storm surge it makes, and the bigger the area that it affects. And that'll be important here when we look a little farther down here. All right, so there we are. This is tomorrow afternoon nominally in this area, beginning to make its turn to the north. Okay, let's go through the day here, and you see that the expectation...
Wind-related dangers arrive first, with elevated locations experiencing the earliest impacts. Peak gusts could materialize overnight Sunday into Monday morning, particularly across eastern regions and higher elevations. These powerful bursts will continue Monday, extending into Tuesday morning as the entire system passes nearby. The prolonged nature means damage accumulates over many hours rather than a brief period. Rainfall presents an equally critical hazard. Forecasts project accumulations reaching 2 to 3 feet across portions of the island, with isolated pockets potentially receiving 40 inches.
The more storm surge it makes, and the bigger the area that it affects. And that'll be important here when we look a little farther down here. All right, so there we are. This is tomorrow afternoon nominally in this area, beginning to make its turn to the north. Okay, let's go through the day here, and you see that the expectation is maybe a little weakening, but still an extremely strong Category 4 or 5 hurricane approaching overnight tomorrow night the southern coast of Jamaica. So that
these extreme totals become particularly dangerous when falling upon mountainous terrain. Steep slopes northeast of the capital city rise dramatically, and moisture hitting these peaks must flow downward. All that runoff funnels through urban areas, towns, and villages before reaching the coast. This creates severe flash flooding conditions throughout populated zones. Additionally, the saturated terrain becomes unstable, triggering mudslides and debris flows down hillsides. The combination of factors makes this an extraordinarily perilous situation.
That's what that Tuesday a.m. means. And that's the Hurricane Center's estimate of what the various sizes would be. So here you can see up here the tropical storm force winds, way bigger than the island, much, much bigger than the island. Hurricane force gusts about the size of the island, almost maybe 80% or so covering the island. And this is a hurricane force sustained wind. Now, what's important here is there's the hurricane center track for the center of the storm, and their estimate for the hurricane force sustained is just about to the Kingston.
Storm surge adds another dimension to the threats facing coastal communities. Should the cyclone make landfall near forecast positions, water levels along the southern coastline could rise up to 13 feet above typical high tide marks. However, exact landfall location significantly affects surge distribution. A strike at one specific point produces maximum surge there, while a slight deviation shifts the worst inundation to neighboring areas. Such variations fall within forecast uncertainty ranges. Should the track adjust even marginally, the capital's harbor could face the most severe surge conditions.
The hurricane force sustained wind. Now, what's important here is there's the hurricane center track for the center of the storm, and their estimate for the hurricane force sustained is just about to the Kingston area. But if we go through an eye wall replacement cycle and the storm expands, weakens but expands, that could expand this out and put more water into Kingston Harbor and so forth. It becomes actually more dangerous along the coast. The peak winds might be less, but still very strong. And
all south-facing shorelines will experience elevated water levels, but the 13-foot maximum incorporates worst-case scenarios for the most vulnerable locations. This measurement represents height above normal high tide, not average sea level, indicating potentially catastrophic inundation. The capital's international airport sits on a causeway extending into the harbor at an elevation of just 10 feet above mean sea level. Since mean sea level remains lower than high tide levels, surge forecasts of 13 feet would completely submerge airport facilities. Even inundation reaching 10 feet above normal high tide would overwhelm the entire complex. The airport faces likely isolation and damage unless the track shifts sufficiently westward to spare the harbor from maximum surge impact. The outlook for this critical facility appears grim under most scenarios. Additional vulnerable zones exist throughout the metropolitan region. The capital city and its largest suburb occupy opposite sides of an extensive wetland area serving as the primary drainage basin. A major canal channels stormwater from throughout the urban core, collecting flow through large gullies, including the Sandy Gully and similar features. These waterways converge and empty at the harbor. When storm surge pushes inland, it blocks this drainage system, preventing water from escaping. This creates a compounding flood threat, as rainfall runoff cannot discharge while surge water simultaneously forces its way inland. This marshland routinely experiences flooding under normal heavy rain events. The wastewater treatment facility serving portions of the metropolitan area also sits in this vulnerable zone, risking operational failure that would create additional public health concerns. These combined challenges present overwhelming difficulties for the capital region. Regional rainfall impacts extend beyond the primary target. The southern coastal areas have already received 1 to 2 feet of precipitation, and forecasts call for similar additional amounts through midweek. The storm's projected path carries it across eastern portions of neighboring Cuba before continuing into the Bahamas archipelago. The forecast cone shows gradual northward progression throughout the week. Another island, territory farther north, will need to monitor developments closely as the weekend approaches. Multiple serious challenges converge simultaneously. The situation facing the island nation appears particularly severe, with hopes that the eventual track might spare significant population centers from the worst impacts. However, current projections offer little clarity regarding such possibilities.